My name is Dennis Speed, and I want to welcome everyone today to the Saturday Dialogue with LaRouche. This is October 12th, and it's 1 week after the meeting that was held in which we dedicated that meeting, which was actually a Schiller Institute meeting, to the World Space Week and the International Observe the Moon Day. But that also happened in a broader context, and that context has tumultuously tumbled onto the stage of world affairs. It's been punctuated by a particular speech made on October 9th by the President of the United States, a speech whose implications, assuming that he is able to act on the implications of it, would be the most important speech given since certainly Ronald Reagan's March 23rd, 1983 speech on the Strategic Defense Initiative, but I'd say it could ultimately be even more important than that. That speech has a very specific meaning to us, the one that Reagan gave, because of its relationship to Lyndon LaRouche. What has happened is that the President of the United States has brought up something in his speech, which we're going to try to delineate through a series of video clips, which will discuss that topic. And I think it's better to leave it to those portions of video. So what I want to do is to set up our introduction, which is that we are going to show you a very short, less than 2-minute section of a speech given by Lyndon LaRouche. This was in 1988. It was after his conviction. He was, knew that he was going to jail. It was a speech he was giving days before that was to happen. And this is what was on his mind. Let's go.
That is, if we were to take the attitude which the United States had under the Kennedy space program, or it was actually the Eisenhower Kennedy space program from about 1958, the so-called Sputnik, post-Sputnik program, to about 1965, if we maintained that, combined with policies of investment tax credits for investments of a suitable kind, with a science enrichment program in our schools and similar kinds of things that we did then, nothing more than that, I can assure you that knowing what we know is important to work upon in science, in technology, knowing the kinds of projects which are the best way to express these technological improvements, I assure you that if mankind on this planet had the political will to do that, we would increase the potential population density of this planet at a higher standard of living by a factor as much of 40 over the days. Next 3 generations, a factor of 10. We could sustain, by the end of this century, or the end of 2 generations, we could say we would be sustaining a potential population in the order of magnitude of 100 billion people. More comfortably, much better fed, much more secure, much freer, much less crowded than today, because we'd use land.
How would that be possible? Well, on the other hand, that's what was on his mind as he faced his imprisonment, which would begin in Alexandria, Virginia, and then would take a tour of the United States. That's what he was thinking about. The reason that that was what LaRouche was thinking about is because that is the topic that has been the topic in the United States, which has been hard fought, particularly since November 22nd, 1963. In order to go directly, as I say, into this, I'll simply refer to our next film clip and, or video clip, excuse me. It would show the next 2, I think, subsequent. Let's do those in.
But I think to start with, we should comment on this fairly extraordinary press conference given by Donald Trump on October 9th, where he addressed the question of why he's for ending the never-ending wars. Helga, what were your thoughts when you saw this press conference with Trump?
Well, I'm actually, very happy. And I think we should really encourage all our viewers to watch this video clip yourselves, because the Western media is not going to report it. They have not yet done it, and they may never do it. As a matter of fact, they are completely distorting it. But what Trump did in this press conference, I would actually say makes him an absolute candidate for the next Peace Nobel Prize. And I'm saying that, the Ethiopian president just correctly and justifiably got the Peace Nobel Prize, which has been given to many unworthy people in the past. But what Trump actually said is really historic, because he reverses I would say, at least 50 years of paradigm shift, which we talked about many times, which followed the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which led the United States on the path of the Anglo-American unipolar world rule, which, back and forth with different presidents changed. But Trump is reversing that. And he's obviously, bringing the United States back in the direction of what the United States was intended for, with the US Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I know that many of our viewers will have already, a hard time to breathe, up to hyperventilation when I'm saying this, but please listen to the speech yourself.
If we go on the theory that some of the folks in Washington go by, who all do very well with the military-industrial complex. I mean, the military-industrial complex, take a look at Dwight Eisenhower. He had it figured right many years ago. It's got tremendous power. They like fighting. They make a lot of money when they fight. But it was time to bring our soldiers back home. So I see, and I will tell you, the hardest thing I have to do, by far, much harder than the witch hunt, is signing letters to parents of soldiers that have been killed. And it's not only that, in areas where there's not a lot of upside, if there's any upside at all, and in many cases there's only downside. And especially when that soldier was killed in a blue-on-green attack. You know what that is, right? That's where a soldier being trained or whatever turns his gun on an American soldier. Here, son, take your gun. You know how to use it. And he takes the gun and he turns it and he shoots one. We have many of them in Afghanistan, in particular in Afghanistan. The hardest thing I have to do is signing those letters. That's the hardest thing I have to do. And each letter is different. We make each letter different. And last week I signed 5 of them for Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, 1 in Syria from 2 weeks ago. And sometimes I call the parents. Sometimes I see the parents. I go to Dover when I can, but it's so devastating for the parents that, it's so devastating. When they bring that boy or young woman out of the back of those big, powerful planes in a coffin, and the parents are there. We have people that do that. That's what they do. They work that. They accommodate everybody. That's what they do. They do an incredible job. And I said, the parents seem to be okay. I'll get there early. The parents seem to be okay. Well, actually, sir, they aren't. No, the way they're talking, they're really okay, aren't they? Sir, you never know until the back of that massive cargo plane opens up and they walk down holding a coffin with 4 or 5 great soldiers on each side of it, representing our various forces. That you never know. And then I see it, and I see people that were smiling, oh, Mr. President, thank you for being here, thank you for being here, and I think they're doing great. And then 20 minutes later, we'll be outside when that big plane pulls up, and that door comes down, and they are walking the coffin with their boy inside this coffin with an American flag over the top, and they're walking that coffin down this ramp. And I've seen people that I thought were really incredible the way they would. I didn't even understood how they could take it so well. Scream like I've never seen anything before. Sometimes they'll run to the coffin. They'll break through military barriers. They'll run to the coffin and jump on top of the coffin, crying, mothers and wives crying desperately. And this is on these endless wars that just never stop. And there's a time and there's a place, but it's time to stop. And just to finish, last Friday I went to Walter Reed, and I gave out 5 Purple Hearts to incredible young men, in this case, all men. And they took a beating. Beautiful people, they took a beating. One couldn't be there because the beating was so great that he was at a totally different part of the world. He lost a leg, he lost an arm. Ryan, he had tremendous damage, beyond even what these young folks went through. But I'll tell you what, for me, it's very hard when I see that. It's very hard. It's easy to talk tough, you know, tough guys, all these tough guys. Let's keep fighting, let's keep fighting. If they had to go to Walter Reed, where they do unbelievable work, I have to tell you, these doctors are unbelievable. You know, it's easy to say, oh, they're the best in the world. I've never seen anything like it. One young man last week had his nose rebuilt, and they said it was in 1,000 pieces. And I said, so where were you hurt? He said, my face, sir, was almost obliterated. I said, you have a better face than I do. He said, sir, I had a doctor who was unbelievable. And they put it together. They said, he said 1,000 fragments. Now, I don't know if that's even possible, but 1,000 fragments. And they put it together. And his father, who was crying, came up to me and said, you're not going to believe this, but my son didn't have a great-looking nose, and now his nose is better. Okay? It's an amazing thing. But when you see these at the Purple Hearts, you see this kind of thing, and I see a lot of it at Walter Reed. And again, the job those doctors and the people do at Walter Reed, it's something to be commended. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Let me add that in a tweet that he sent out the morning of that press conference, he stated, the United States has spent $8 trillion fighting and policing in the Middle East. Thousands of our great soldiers have died or been badly wounded. Millions have died on the other side. Going into the Middle East is the worst decision ever made in the history of our country. We went to war under a false and now disproven premise, weapons of mass destruction. There were none. Now we are slowly and carefully bringing our great soldiers and military home. Our focus is on the big picture. Well, what is the big picture? The big picture is that the nation of Russia, the nation of China, the nation of India, and the nation of the United States represent a concentration of power in nation states, each of which represents continents, usually, which is combined, capable, if properly deployed, of ridding the world of the danger of not only thermonuclear war, but more importantly, of radical, rapid depopulation, a form of radical, rapid depopulation, which is the intent and conscious policy of persons such as the C40 Cities program of Michael Bloomberg, Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, Prince Charles, Prince Philip, and others who have a conscious policy, David Attenborough. Then there are those who have a de facto policy, which we recognize many don't understand, but they nonetheless have it. And were that policy to be able to be carried out, what you would see is a depopulation of the globe in the short term, meaning over the period of the next 15 to 20 years by about 4 billion or more people. The notion of eliminating, for example, carbon fuels without a high energy density replacement, whether that be nuclear or thermonuclear power, as even and especially people like the environmentalists Stuart Brand, Patrick Moore, Michael Schellenberger, not Schellenhuber, who is a different person. These people all agree. You've got to have nuclear power. If you're actually talking about, from their standpoint, stopping carbon emissions, that's how you'd have to do it. But that's not the proposal. That's not the orientation of the people who talk about this. Matter of fact, their orientation is supplied for them by what's called the Green Finance Institute, by the C40 Group, and what's called now the Green New Deal. Now, knowing that it would be impossible for us to actually detail this in such a fashion that people would get it in time, some of us decided it were best to resort to the principle of metaphor. And that was very much in evidence 2 weeks ago when someone decided to take Greta Thunberg seriously and proposed, as they proposed, if you really want to get rid of the most widely polluting potentials on carbon, then eat babies, because of what use, after all, is a newborn. It's an old, very specific idea that Ben Franklin used in debate and in discussion. People may not know this, but the first major active public debate on the issue of population began after 1729 because of the writing by Benjamin Franklin of a paper on paper currency. And he wrote in that paper that the basis of wealth for the colonies, there was no United States then, of course, it's the American colonies, would be the extensive growth in population and advanced agriculture that would be carried out in those colonies. That became a problem. And there was a person by the name, an Italian, by the name of Gian Maria Ortez, or Del Orte, who wrote a refutation of Franklin. That was then plagiarized by the famous or infamous Parson Thomas Malthus. It became his essay on population, which came out in the 1790s, but it's what qualified him to become the first chair of political economy at Haileybury College. That's where political economy comes from. It was born giving Thomas Malthus, who was an employee of the British East India Company, his chair of political economy. And that's what political economy means. As Bridenstine, the head of NASA, said, we are not on the moon or on Mars because we have a political problem, not primarily a technical problem. And we were removed from the moon through a political process, which began in Dallas on November 22nd in 1963. Now, there was a reason that began. Both Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Donald Trump referred to Dwight Eisenhower and a speech he gave, which has become well known because it had a very, very specific quote. But people have generally not seen the speech. It's 16 minutes in total, and it's not only on that topic, but we did excerpt the speech so that you get the context of what he was saying. And then I want to say something in conclusion after that, prior to introducing Daniel. So can we see Dwight Eisenhower?
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. It is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society.
Okay, so now we can talk about Lyndon LaRouche and who Lyndon LaRouche actually was. Besides the fact that Lyndon LaRouche had written to Eisenhower after coming back home as a veteran and asked him to run for president at a time that Eisenhower was the president of Columbia University, besides that connection, it's important to recognize what Lyndon LaRouche did. The United States, and generally other nations had the same problem, but the United States University disappeared during the 1960s. And there are no universities in the United States today. There are merely corporations. There are really no students in the United States. There are intellectual slaves, and they are basically treated the same way that Nikolai Gogol explained in his novel Dead Souls, or Dead Serfs, as it would be properly translated. The only purpose of the student is that he represents a debt. The only purpose of them going to school is to create a debt. They are excused for a debt the same way that houses used to be. My father bought his house, or attempted to buy his house, took him 20 years. The house was $12,500. Now, the people in the colleges represent a debt of $100,000, $200,000 or more, a human mortgage. That's their significance. What LaRouche attempted to do, and what he was successful in doing, was he raided the universities of the late 60s and early 70s. And that included particularly Columbia, where we are vilified to this day for the number of people he ripped off from that campus, and also from other campuses, University of Pennsylvania, many other schools. But the reason I wanted that this last part be played, you may notice that what was said was that the corporate contracts supplanted intellectual curiosity, and that the blackboard was replaced by the computer. Some people think that's progress. The issue of metaphor, which we just tried to sort of dramatize couple weeks ago, and which is still resonating. We've managed to tar a certain process, and we'll be doing more. That is the issue, in one sense, to understand about the issue of the United States and how we, on this Columbus Day, can rediscover America. We talked about this last week. We referenced the idea that America is not a place. It is an idea. It's also a place, but that place is not North America. The place is wherever it is. So wherever you see the principle of America being manifest, that's where it is. And you will notice when you see it manifest that will usually be imperfect, because the nature of the principle of America renders that it must always be perfectly imperfect. It's always about discovery. It's always about uncovering something, taking down a system. It's what Shelley discusses at the end of his poem, The Cloud, when he talks about the idea that the cloud arises. I arise and unbuild again. I arise and unbuild again. This doesn't mean it's anarchistic. The process of discovery of hypothesis has principles. You follow a principle of creative discovery. But when you do that, you may be the only person in the world that has the idea. Therefore, you're the only person that's right. When Einstein's theory of relativity was discovered by him, at that moment that he had it, he was the only person in the world that had it. So the conception that is at work, and the issue of the conception which is at work, is how do you actually get to the discovery of America? America is an Italian invention. America was invented in a process of discussion that involved many people, hundreds of people, but a very small group, specific group, which involved someone born in 1377 by the name of Filippo Brunelleschi, somebody born in 1397 by the name of Toscanelli, somebody born in 1401 by the name of Nicholas of Cusa, and later on, somebody born in 1452 by the name of Leonardo da Vinci. It also involved somebody by the name of Machiavelli, who hired da Vinci in Florence for the purpose of attempting to make Florence into a seaport, sort of as a way of defeating Pisa. Leonardo da Vinci was a military engineer. That's what his job was, and that's what he did. He also did other things. And those other things that he did were incorporated into the singular idea that existed in the Italian Renaissance, that the concept of principle and the concept of discovery was applied to all areas of human endeavor simultaneously. There were fields of distinction and distinctiveness, but the idea was that a set of principles, there had to be a singular set of principles that allowed for human discovery to be made by one individual or a group of individuals who were the carriers of these principles. In 1439, when Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa was the responsible organizer, convener of the Council of Florence, or the organizer, actually the Pope was the convener, but he was the organizer. And the documents were brought from Greece and from the East, many of them in Arabic, which brought back Plato. Plato's Timaeus was the only dialogue that was really known. The other dialogues became known in this process. Something happened in the mind of the Florentines and others that created the problem that, or rather, created the prospect of solving the problem of what the nature of science itself could become. In that context, Nicholas of Cusa had written something, which I think Daniel will tell you a bit about, and it was done from the standpoint of trying to solve a problem. How do you bring together sections of the world that are so different, so opposed, so apparently at war with one another? How do you bring them together around a set of principles that shows them that there's a harmony, actually, a higher harmony, a coincidence of opposites that supersedes the idea that anybody has, anybody in that society at that time has, of how that society might be governed? How do you introduce an entirely new principle that people haven't seen before, or an old principle that they did see in a new way? And how does that allow you to build a completely different world and export the best of your world to another world without violating the principles of that culture? How do you do that? That was the subject of the Renaissance. And that's the subject of what we are doing here. That's what LaRouche did. He built an organization which was to be devoted to that idea. It's a method of thinking. And that was a method that Cusa specifically brought into consciousness in a way which is required to understand how the United States got here. So to talk about that, we have our candidate for United States Senate from New Jersey, Daniel Burke.
Thank you very much, Dennis. So I am Daniel Burke, and I am a LaRouche independent candidate for U.S. Senate in New Jersey for 2020. And I have to tell you how blessed I feel to be able to come forward as a representative of this movement and what we're, the principles to which we're dedicating ourselves. I need this. Thank you. So I'd like to begin by referring to a statement that was written by Helga Zepp-LaRouche for the purpose of a second wave of international days of action on the campuses. This is our team at NYU University this week campaigning for the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, and we distributed a statement which concludes with the following paragraphs. If it is possible to bring Europe and the United States into cooperation with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and in the case of the US, into working with China on space travel, Mankind will not be on the verge of a climate apocalypse, but rather at the beginning of a new era in which man's inherent capacity for reason can freely develop, and we can enter, in a certain sense, the adulthood of our species. We will shape a more human age and demonstrate that this world is actually the best of all possible worlds, because a genius is potentially located in every human being, and the degrees of freedom in the development of our species will increase without limit to the extent that more people can realize that potential in themselves. The indispensable step to achieve this new paradigm of thinking is the full exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, who was persecuted and imprisoned in the 1980s and 1990s by the evil and desperate Grand Inquisitors of the British Empire in their attempt to block access to his ideas. We need the bold and optimistic vision of thinkers like Leibniz, Schiller, Einstein, Kraft-Erika, and Lyndon LaRouche, because the cultural pessimism of Malthus, Nietzsche, and Spengler leads to fascism and war, while positive ideas of mankind lead to new renaissances and flourishing periods in history. It is up to all of us which direction we take. I can report to you that we have tremendous curiosity on the campuses. This particular day was quite emblematic of that, because in the first several hours, and you'll see our signs, protect Trump, jail the banksters, we commit to the Moon-Mars mission, there are no limits to growth, there is no climate emergency. Why won't your professor let you study Lyndon LaRouche? The first several hours, people were, well, I would say maybe an hour and a half. People were a little bit afraid to come up and talk to us. And we had at least 2 people coming by, students, who said, I agree with you 100%, but I'm afraid to be seen talking to you. And that was the kind of thing that we ran into, which suddenly shifted. It did shift about 2 hours in. Suddenly, we had hordes of people coming to talk to us. And we had, no time to talk to every single one of them. Oftentimes, we would have a situation like this, and then 2 or 3 more people would come over and peer over and look and say, what's this about? I titled my presentation today, Our Political Life in the Galaxy. And I really want you to consider, and this is what we're calling on the youth to consider, that you don't live on the earth. You do not live on the earth. You don't live in New York or New Jersey or wherever you may be, the people who are watching this online. You don't. You live in the galaxy. People may have heard the news from August 30th that for the second time that we know of, an interstellar object has entered the solar system, a comet that came from afar. We think we know which star system it came from. It's quite remarkable. So the whole notion that we are merely earthbound is proven quite wrong with someone's intervention, maybe divine, sending this messenger from afar. I'll take questions at the end. You probably heard the news about Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space, so that we can now say, man walks not on Earth. And that's a true statement. Here's what he said. He died yesterday at the age of 86, I believe, maybe 85. I stepped into that void, and I didn't fall in. I was mesmerized by the stars. They were everywhere, up, above, down, below, to the left, to the right, I can still hear my breath and my heartbeat in that silence. (1965). Oops, I'm sorry, the title is incorrect. This is footage from that spacewalk in 1965. Please go ahead.
Дорогу к ней продолжает осваивать человек. В Советском Союзе впервые в истории осуществлен выход человека из корабля в космическое пространство. Это подлинные документальные кадры. Они сняты 18 марта 1965 года автоматической кинокамерой, установленной на борту космического корабля «Восход-2». Пилотирует корабль Павел Беляев. Вышел из корабля Алексей Леонов. Человек в межпланетном пространстве. И он живет, работает, улыбается. Значит, люди смогут стыковать корабли, монтировать орбитальные станции, пересаживаться с ракеты на ракету, выходить из аварийных ситуаций. Смелый и важный шаг совершен по пути к Луне. И первыми совершили его советские люди.
He was outside of the Soyuz craft for 12 minutes and very nearly died. In fact, his spacesuit, the pressure became so great that he couldn't get back into the airlock, and he had to deflate his suit and risk dying of the thinness of the oxygen in order to get back into the vehicle. Just incredible. I mean, take a look at this then. It's a little difficult to see on this screen, but on the right-hand side is a cosmonaut, and on the left-hand side is an astronaut. And this is correctly titled The Handshake 1975. And people may have heard of this. This takes place over Germany, over divided Germany at the height of the Cold War, right? At a very significant point in the Cold War. The Soyuz craft docked with the Apollo craft, and they shook hands. Tom Stafford from NASA and Leonov. I believe that's him in the picture. This is Leonov on the left, and Slayton on the right, I suppose. I'm not sure. I know it's not Stafford. It looks like it's Slayton. So, you may need to reload my because I changed one little thing there. So I think we want to ask ourselves the question, how could it be that one small step for man, for a man, is a giant leap for mankind? There's a certain paradox within that. I think you'd agree with me, namely that an individual is not the species. And yet, what Armstrong said is certainly true. This is where I want to bring your attention to the work of Nicholas of Cusa, whom we got a good introduction to him from Dennis. How is it that one small step for a man is one giant leap for mankind? Here's Nicholas of Cusa. He had a certain concept, which we know as the coincidentia oppositorum, or the coincidence of opposites, which he used in his book, De Docta Ignorantia, on learned ignorance. He used a number of geometrical metaphors to present. He said, consider the following. These are each snapshots of a circle. So you can imagine that the circle that has the arc HG has a smaller circumference than the circle with arc FE, etc. And he said, if you consider that as the circumference of the circle grows, what this demonstrates is that the curvature lessens, then the circle with maximum curvature also has maximum circumference also has minimum curvature, and that would be BA. So that an infinite circle, if you can bring your mind to consider what that might mean, would have total straightness, would not be curved at all. And he used this as a demonstration that although one would think that these are contradictory notions, because how could a circle be straight? When we take these concepts into the realm of creative reason, when we consider the limits, we see the coincidence of these apparently opposing ideas, the minimum and the maximum. They are the same in the infinite. And Mr. LaRouche made the point repeatedly that this is also true in regard to the human individual and the human species. That there are such moments, and I think that Leonov lived them, several of them, in which a single human individual acts as though for mankind, as though mankind, that the contributions of that single individual human being represented the advance of all of mankind. And so the minimum of humanity, the minimum unit of humanity is one person, coincides with the maximum, all humanity. Now, I'm going to switch into a different discussion here to try to give you a sense of the kind of transformation of the underlying axioms of society which we're seeking to create. Aristotle could not have imagined what Leonov did. Here's the way that Aristotle thought, and I'm going to come to his astronomy, his cosmogony. The reason this is essential is if you consider, let me give a little bit of background, which is that Nicholas of Cusa, he was growing up in a period which we call the Renaissance because the great texts of ancient Greece were being reborn, were being reintroduced. He did it intentionally at the Council of Florence when he brought back enormous amounts of material as well as people from Constantinople to reintroduce Plato to Europe. But it was a process that was going on, which he was a part of. He was well known for going down into the sub-basements, into the catacombs of the universities and finding the texts that had been somehow, covered up by history. And so if you think about it, it was not until about 1423, when he's 22 years old, that Aeschylus is reintroduced to Europe. They had lost Aeschylus, so they didn't have, I don't know for how many hundreds of years, but certainly for hundreds and hundreds of years, they had lost Aeschylus. 250 years prior, the Venetian Empire, had embarked upon an Aristotle translation project. They got all of Aristotle that they could possibly get their hands on, and they organized various universities that they controlled, including, I believe, the University of Padua, the University of Bologna. They organized these around Aristotle. Well, what was the fundamental conception that he represented? Cusa attacked him in the following way. Nowadays, the Aristotelian tendency dominates, which finds the coincidence of opposites, which one has to acknowledge to find the ascent toward mystical theology to be a heresy. To those trained in this school, this approach seems to be totally nonsensical. They refuse it as something completely opposite to their intentions. Therefore, it would be close to a miracle, as well as it would be a complete transformation of the school, if they were to abandon Aristotle and reach a higher level. Now, you have to understand, by mystical theology, he doesn't mean mystics, he doesn't mean magic. He means a negative theology. He means an investigation of learned ignorance, as he says. I can go through this another time. But the point is, Aristotle denies the coincidence of opposites. It denies, and I'll show you why. Here's what Aristotle has to say. Since, according to common agreement, whose agreement, I don't know, there's nothing outside and separate in existence from sensible spatial magnitudes, the objects of all thought are in sensible forms, both abstract objects and all the states and affections of sensible things. Hence, no one can learn or understand anything in the absence of senses. And when the mind is actively aware of anything, it is necessarily aware of it along with an image, for images are like sensuous contents. While in respect to all the other senses, we may fall below many species of animals. In respect to touch, we far excel our species, all other species, in exactness of discrimination. That is why man is the most intelligent of the animals. So the overriding school of thought of the scholastics in the time period where Cusa comes around is that what makes us human is our sense of touch. And that all knowledge must be sensible, must be related to something that has to do with the sense organs, with sense impressions. So if you think this way, well, I don't have an image of an infinite circle in my mind, do you? I can't imagine what that looks like. Then it's not possible to use the metaphor, the principle of metaphor that Cusa uses to present that idea of the coincidence of opposites. And what is the result of this type of thinking? This is what Aristotle thought the universe looked like. The earth is fixed in the middle, and then we have the moon traveling around us, Mercury, etc., the sun between Venus and Mars. We have fixed stars, and then there's some kind of limit to the universe, it's enclosed, and there's the prime mover who caused a rotation in his sphere, which in turn caused the other spheres to rotate. This was an object of religious, dogma, really. I mean, it was just total dogma, right? If you didn't accept Aristotle's view of the universe in the 1600s, so 1900 years after Aristotle lived, then you were in huge trouble. Kepler's books, which challenged this, were on the list of banned books by this cardinal, Bellarmine, and others, who enforced a religious doctrine that the universe is fixed, that the earth is the center of the solar system, and so on and so forth. And this was also the issue back in the days of Plato and Pythagoras, because the Pythagoreans already understood that the earth was not the center of the solar system, of the universe. But there were people who, like Aristarchus, who professed this Pythagorean understanding, and what happened to them is essentially a witch hunt. They were put on trial and killed for challenging the idea that, the Olympian gods, right, Saturn, or the Greek names, of course, but the Olympian gods being the planets, that they might do something other than what had been traditionally accepted beforehand. And they said, this is really a cult of Gaia, because it was a cult of the people who, a cult of the earth goddess, right? And they said, you can't move the earth goddess from her hearth. You can't move her. As soon as you say that the earth is not at the center, you're challenging the cult of Gaia, and we won't accept that. And they burned them. They killed them. So this is a matter of a political, religious commitment to something fraudulent about the world, enforced because of this commitment to sense perception, because of this complete block on the coincidence of opposites. Here's a consequence. I'm arguing that this is a consequence of that way of thinking. Aristotle says in Politics, the slave is a living possession and property, an instrument. The master is only the master of the slave. He does not belong to him. Whereas the slave is not only the slave of his master, but wholly belongs to him. For that some should rule and others be ruled is a thing not only necessary, but expedient. From the hour of their birth, some are marked out for subjugation, others for rule. Then ought the good to rule and have supreme power? Should the best man rule? No. The principle to be maintained is that the multitude ought to be supreme rather than the few best. For the many, of whom each individual is but an ordinary person, when they meet together may very likely be better than the few good, if regarded not individually, but collectively. For some understand one part, some another, and among them they understand the whole. So this is part and parcel of the assertion the universe is fixed, that's how it is, don't argue with it. And I'll counterpose that to Cusa's concept in his great political work, Concordantia Catholica, in which he proposes, well, I'll read what he says. There is in the people a divine seed by virtue of their common equal birth and the equal natural rights of all men, so that all authority which comes from God, as does man himself, is recognized as divine when it arises from the common consent of all the subjects. This is that divinely ordained marital state of spiritual union based on a lasting harmony by which a commonwealth is guided in the fullness of peace toward eternal bliss. And this document provides the foundations for the system of government that we created in the revolution that we waged against the British Empire. The concept that is based on the consent of the governed and that all men are created equal with rights that come from God and not from an emperor. That's what Cusa gives us. I would ask you to, to consider, maybe it has to do with an ability to look at the different, apparently opposing interests of different civilizations, different city-states in his case. Today we would say different nations. We're dealing with something different in the nation-state. To look at the interests of many diverse peoples and consider in what realm do they coincide. This is a famous geometrical metaphor used by Cusa. He says, imagine you start with a circle and you'd like to approximate that circle by inscribing a polygon in it. And what you do with that polygon is that you increase the number of sides of that polygon. And isn't it the case, one might say, that as you increase the number of sides, your shape, your polygon comes closer and closer to a circle? And the answer is no. Because with each angle, with each side that you add, you've gone even further from the circle, which has no angles, and one side, if you want to call it that, really no sides. And so merely pursuing a deductive approximation of the truth, this is his metaphor, merely attempting a deductive approximation of the truth doesn't work. You cannot use logic to attain unto the circle in the sense of Euclidean logic or the exhaustion method of Eudoxus. Only creativity works. Only seeing unto what is that leap by which you go to a higher order, as the circle is of a higher order than the rectilinear. And so I want to sort of put this forward, finally, as, you know, if you see this in context, that Aristotle's enforcement of the enslavement of the world, right, by a system of master and slave, that system is enforced by the same means that we keep enforced, that they kept enforced, the idea of a fixed universe, that you bow to the Olympian gods and they do as they please, and we don't have any choice in the matter. Cusa challenged that. We are fighting to challenge that. That's what a successful youth movement will do, a student movement will do in this country and in the world, is to dare to oppose the Zeusians, dare to oppose those who call for the reduction of the population, as Zeus does in the myth of Prometheus and Zeus, and instead to introduce creative reason. And so what I'm calling on you to do is to join us this week to continue the outreach to the young people, to the students of the United States, to say we cannot allow that our youth are divorced from some physical understanding of the true laws of the universe. We cannot allow the cult of environmentalism, in which we say that man is nothing but a beast, in which we say that we should reduce the world's population because of the CO2. You know, I was saying to people who we met out there, you know, imagine what you're dealing with. That basically, if you're a developing country, you go to Mark Carney at the Bank of England, or some representative of his ilk, and you say, you know, I need some power plants. I need factories. I need to lift my people out of poverty. This is the future. And Carney says, oh, we'd love to help you. We would love to help you get out of poverty, definitely. But, you know, the environment, you know, I mean, there's not much I can do because of the environment. And they use that as an excuse to prevent investment in anything that would actually lift people out of poverty. And they're doing that actively now and trying to force it in a much, much worse level. That's what we're up against. If you want to break through that, it's not a matter of logical arguments with people. It's a matter of holding a mirror up to them to consider, what does it mean to be human? And I would argue strongly that Leonov knew what it means to be human. It means to go to that next stage of human evolution, that next stage of, as Helga LaRouche put it, the maturation of mankind in space. That we should look to the next 50 years and consider what it is that we want. If we stick with war and bailouts, we're not going to see 50 years. So it's absolutely essential now that we back this president against the coup that he's facing, and that we bring about a Moon-Mars mission for all of mankind. Thank you.
Yeah, right up there.
Okay, first of all, if you want an anti-war candidate, you don't have to to just pick Trump. Bernie Sanders voted against every single war action. Pete Buttigieg fought in Afghanistan and vowed to end it because he knows that it's stupid. Eternal economic growth makes no sense because if you destroy everything and build a factory, you have no more plants. You have no more oxygen. Doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or how much people have, contributed to climate change. It doesn't matter. Because if you turn all of the rainforests into soy farms, which is what they're doing, then you have no more rainforests, which means you have no more medicine, you have no more biodiversity, you don't have anything that makes the planet run. Like, I don't understand the limitless economic growth. I want it explained to me. I want you to tell me why it's okay to continue to build things and sell it to people who don't have the money to pay you and be like, oh, it's great because we're making money. But you're not making money. It's just the top. Right now we owe China billions of dollars. All of our wealth is built off of the debt of the middle class. There is no economic growth. There is just debt and people dying and an ocean that's has 80% less fish and is full of plastic. I don't understand. Right now, economic growth means destroying everything so that everyone dies. But it's okay if we go to outer space, right? Because we destroy this planet, we can just go to a new one and destroy that one. What are you guys talking about? What does economic growth mean? That's my question.
To answer that question, we will introduce our next speaker. Diane. Although, while you're coming up, I'll pose a harder one. How is it possible? How could anybody possibly believe that you could have 100 billion people on the world and it would be less crowded? How about a harder question? How is it possible to believe that in order to have less crowding on the world, you need 100 billion people? That's not for you to answer.
Great, thank you. Well, I have some questions for you, which is, how do you know that there's 80% of the fish are gone? I'm just asking how you know that. No, it's a...
I've read articles by marine biologists who apparently are imaginary, you guys.
No, but I would ask you how you know it and how you can prove it. Because that's the question.
You can just go down there and watch the entire environment collapsing.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you know that is the Earth at the center of our solar system?
No.
How do you know that?
Because it isn't.
How do you prove it?
They went into space, they took
But
pictures.
can you prove it?
What are you talking about?
I'm asking how you know what is true.
Physical evidence is showing us that we've destroyed the planet.
But I'm asking if you know whether the Earth is at the center of our solar system or not. I mean, it would seem to me, if you're going to assert that we're destroying the whole planet, the first step might be to know where our planet is. And if you can demonstrate where the planet is, for starters, some knowledge of that, then there might be reason to believe the assertion that you can also prove we're destroying the whole planet.
That has nothing to do with what I just said. You're diverting and making up nonsense.
I'm asking how we would know we're destroying the whole planet. I mean, I think one problem that you are falling into is you think that our view of economics has to do with money, which it doesn't.
Okay, that's good.
And I also think that you have decided to believe a bunch of things which you yourself cannot scientifically prove. And I think if you're going to... No, I'm asking you, because the question is, if you're going to propose the kind of things that are being proposed, for example, by Bernie Sanders, who supported absolutely outrageous sanctions on Russia and completely went along with the lies about Ukraine, and I know this because I heard him speak, so he has a policy that would put us in a direct conflict with Russia, which is not a very good place to be. But if you're going to take these assertions, you should be able to personally know them. And if you're going to take the idea that we should have, maybe you don't believe this, that we should have 0 CO2 emissions by a certain date.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking.
Well, right now, according to
But I'm asking you, but I'm asking you, I'm asking you.
Well, I think the main cause of CO2 is not cars, it's factory farms. So, and that's political suicide to possibly reduce people's burgers. So, like, and also, regardless of what you believe about climate change, people who study viruses say that if there's going to be, you know, a giant virus that wipes out most of the population, it will come from a factory farm because we're pumping antibiotics into these tiny places where the animals are dying in their own filth.
Right.
So if there's going to be a virus that kills everyone, the people that study that are like, yeah, it's not a factory.
Well, here's something. I'm going to,
There's so many things that
okay,
we're doing
let's
to
start
our
another,
you know, which
well,
one
let's look at this. Because believing all these things has made you very, very pessimistic. That's what I'm hearing. You think we're destroying the planet. You think there is no such thing as economic growth that's not somehow inherently destructive.
No, I think you can create things that don't destroy the planet. I'm just
Okay,
asking
that's
you
good.
what your version of economic growth is, because right now economic growth means destruction. So I'm asking you your new definition of economic growth. That's my question.
Well, our definition is what Mr. LaRouche said, which is how many people can you sustain per given land area healthily. And that requires certain things. Obviously, if you are at the level of burning wood and scratching up in the dirt to find food, you're not going to be able to sustain very many people per square mile, say, as an example. So if someone makes a discovery that coal or charcoal is much more efficient than burning wood, that allows you to have more energy using fewer resources. And if people figured out how to cook their food, which they apparently did a long time ago, it means your life expectancy will be longer, that your standard of living will be higher. You will live better, and you can support more people in a given land area. And so this question, which was raised earlier about nuclear power, we're unfortunately at a point where we can't just shut down all of our coal-fired plants or gas plants because people will die, because we won't be able to produce the energy that we need. So we're going to have to build more of those while we're working on developing fission plants and developing fusion. But the key to this is the question of energy, because the more dense, the more efficient your energy can be, the more that you are able to use even smaller amounts of resources or determine what is a resource. So what they're doing in China, which is very interesting, is apparently they don't measure GDP in money anymore. They measure it by what they call innovation, which is a really interesting idea. It's very foreign to the United States to think of it in terms of that. But so this is the way that you measure your success, not in terms of dollars. What we've had for a long time is a terrible fraud, because you can increase your quote-unquote productivity by reducing the number of people working and saying, oh, therefore I'm producing more. There's all kinds of tricks that they do. Same with unemployment and so on. But that's the question, is energy flux density and potential relative population density. Because you want to start from the idea that human beings are the metric of your success in the universe. The standard of living, the getting away from high amounts of infant mortality, right? And people having adequate food, having adequate education. And what you discover is you can't actually do that in a world that's totally polluted. But if you look at where this comes from, who is funding this belief about the horrible, and I haven't even addressed whether carbon dioxide is actually a pollutant, which is a whole, we've done a lot on that, and you can see that elsewhere. Daniel or others here can take that up. But if you look at who is funding this green, so-called green movement, like Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England, you think about what their policies mean for Africa, what their policies mean for South America. If you're going to go to Africa, like former President Barack Obama did, and tell people, you can't all have air conditioners and automobiles because the planet will boil over. I mean, that's a really sick view. And who's to say the next total breakthrough or the person who discovers fusion is not going to be an African? We don't know that. But there's a lot of assumptions which you seem to have taken for granted.
It's facts.
No.
It's facts.
Well, it may be facts, but
Intellectualism in this country is destroying it. You are just
it's,
making up
no, I'm asking, no.
conference about nothing. It's about assuming that people who have PhDs are stupider than you because
Well, a lot of them are. Actually, a lot of them are. I'm sorry to say that's true. A lot of them are. But I would like to say this is a good question because what I was planning to talk about is the question of the Danish fairy tale, The Emperor Had No Clothes. You know that, right?
you cannot want the entire population to die and still not want to destroy the planet. It's not two opposing views.
Well, why don't you, Daniel, want to say something?
Could I make a
Yeah, go for it.
response?
Yeah, let Daniel, go ahead.
You sort of posed it in response to
Go ahead.
partly what I said. Okay.
Hey, before you continue, can I get each of your names?
Sure, I'm Daniel Burke, and Dennis Speed and Diane Sayre. First of all, thank you for coming, and I thank you for your question, because there was a time period when I was really deeply concerned, as you are, according to the same view. And I began to question that view when I asked myself about the accordance between economic justice for the people of the world and this move, the claim that we need to reduce CO2 emissions. And I just asked myself, is it true that we could bring electricity to 1.1 billion people who don't have it with green policies? And we've encountered many people at NYU this week who certainly believe that it is true. And we're attempting to present to you that it's not true, and that in fact, the people who first introduced the idea that we need to reduce CO2, our thesis to you is that they did it because they wanted to continue the policies of colonialism that keep poor countries poor. And I began to investigate this, as I urge you to as well, and I began to come to the conclusion that you could not have the two, and that I had been duped. And I got really upset because I had been thinking about going to live on a yurt in Oregon and practicing permaculture. Right? I read all of this stuff. And at the same time, I had been a school teacher in the public school system in New Orleans, and I had been told that the charter school movement was going to fix the schools. And this was I read a book at a library at my college that said the charter school movement, it was at Harvard, it was at the Kennedy School Library, they said the charter school movement is the civil rights movement of the day. And so I went down and I became a first grade teacher in New Orleans, and 98% of my students were impoverished. And gradually I saw that it was not working, and I asked myself, well, hold on a second. This doesn't accord with my vision of what it means to have a civil rights movement, to lift all people out of poverty and into the true ideals of the American Republic as I understand them. And then I realized that this was financed by Bill Gates and by the Walton Foundation. And I asked myself, well, what does Walmart want to do with people's schools? And I watched as the unions were destroyed in New Orleans. Now, you can certainly say, oh, these are not connected. But I'm asking you to look and see who does finance this green movement. You know, the head of the Bank of England, I met him in the street about 2 weeks ago. He was at the Bloomberg Global Forum at the Plaza Hotel. He has called for net zero carbon by the year 2030, I believe. And he has organized a group of 130 banks to say which includes Wells Fargo, Jamie Dimons, JP Morgan, all of these people, and they say we're going to start responsible, sustainable banking. And they say we're going to start forcing everyone to report on what types of investments they're making. All of the largest banks in the world, what kind of investments are you making? Are you making green investments or not? If you're not making green investments, you're not allowed anymore to do things. I asked someone at NYU this week about what they thought about this. I said, how do you feel about central bankers making decisions for the governments of the world? They said, I think it's great. I said, I think this is fascism. And in fact, Morgan financed fascists in the World War II period, right, in the 1930s. And everyone knows that all these banks are criminal. So if you begin to notice that Greta came out, she's 16 years old, right? Everyone knows that she's handled. She doesn't organize these things on her own. And you ask yourselves, well, who is running it? Well, Mark Carney came out, head of the Bank of England, came out on the same stage that she did at the United Nations General Assembly about 2 weeks ago. And that's when he announced this climate pact. And I want to encourage you to query whether it is the case that J.P. Morgan and all of the masters of the universe really have the interests of humanity in mind when they're organizing and paying for these climate conferences and so on and so forth, and including the climate organizations like Extinction Rebellion or the Sunrise Movement. Does Tom Steyer really have the interests of humanity at heart? And the last thing I'll say is just that I think that the concepts that Diane brought forward are ones that are really part of that investigation as to whether you can have the industrialization, lifting everyone out of poverty and do that only with green technology. That's an investigation you have to ask yourself. And you might also ask, why isn't it other people aren't talking about ending poverty when they're talking about green stuff? But if you're pursuing that, you'd have to look at what is the effect of having different types of energy at the core of your economy. If you have low quality energy, low intensity, low efficiency energy, you're going to cause enormous pollution, by the way. You're going to cause enormous depletion of your society, of your environment, of your natural environment. It's only by going up the ladder to higher and higher densities of energy. If you look at the amount of uranium that you need to power New York City for 10 years and compare that to the amount of coal or petroleum or wood that you would need, it's minuscule, right? And it allows you to do things that were not possible with the lower qualities of energy. And one would ask, why would we deny Africa and Asia and South America and Central America and Central Asia and so on and so forth, why would we deny them access to what are clearly higher, more potent forms of energy? And why have we denied ourselves that? Because, our movement distinguishes itself by being the people who have fought for fusion power. And anyone who is seriously concerned about the future of mankind, as I can tell you are, knows, as soon as you learn about fusion power, and this happens at the campuses, whenever we start, someone's saying something totally pessimistic, oh, nothing's going to work, everything's bad. Every time I look at my smartphone, I get depressed, right? Then we say, but did you know that at Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, you can tour it, they're working on harnessing the power that's in the sun and replicating that? And then everyone lights up. Everyone gets happy when you think about fusion power. So why is it that for the past 40 years, we've had an abysmal level of funding for it? These are sort of the questions, and why is it, I'll leave it with this, that the one person who really dedicated himself to that, was Lyndon LaRouche, was imprisoned. Thank you.
Hey guys, all right, so I'm gonna have to split in a minute. I think it's all very fascinating. I'm an NYU student. That's how I got here. Woo! Because I just loved like the T-shirts, Eat the Children, Save the Planet. Yeah, I mean, I have pretty extreme views myself. Like, I definitely think like overpopulation is the problem. I also don't really care that the honeybees are dying. I'm pretty sure we could terraform Mars pretty easily. And we could like grow strawberries in like shipping containers. So whatever. I think you guys are great. I hope that I can watch your videos online somewhere, and I will be back at the next conference. Thank you.
Well, yeah, let me just say something. You know, he's got to get going, so so it won't take very long. The issue is, for me, I think for everybody, is well, as MC5 used to say, kick out the jams. That's the issue. You cannot have in America where people are claiming to know and let that stand. What you have to do is you have to provoke the discussion. You must provoke it. You must be as provocative as possible. And the thing that's really happening, I hope, is that in the next weeks, we will live up to a standard that some of us had a long, long time ago. You see, we don't think anybody in contemporary comedy is really dangerous. See, and so we don't really ask you to accept what we're saying. I do agree we need to justify what we're saying. It's fine.
We don't really have to.
I know you get the idea because you know what we did, so you know what the ideas are. The point here is, okay, everybody's saying they're so certain about these things. Well, what if you propose a question that seems to be completely crazy, like you can make the world less crowded by having 100 billion people? Now, I'm not going to answer that. What I am going to say is, I'll point out something. When Thomas Malthus said the world was going to be overpopulated because population increases geometrically and food supply increases arithmetically, it was 1791. 90% of Americans, they were then Americans, were farmers. By 1970, 3% of the American population were farmers, and they were exporting food all over the damn place to like millions and tens of millions of people. Okay? Now, we can say that there may be an issue as to how that food was being produced, but we can also point out that the population of the world, when he said that, hadn't even reached 1 billion. And by 1970, we were at about 4 billion people. So clearly, his premise that because the food supply increased arithmetically and population increased geometrically did not demonstrate that, in fact, people were going to starve to death. There was a guy, there was a book called Famine 1975, came out. And then there was Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb. You know, and Paul Ehrlich got involved in the famous debate with Julian Simon, who said, listen, pick your five commodities you want to pick. I don't care what they are. It was in 1980. He said, and we're going to bet what the prices of these commodities are going to be in 10 years. And so what happened is he took a bet, and the guy picked 5 commodities. You know, copper was one, oil was one, so on. And in every case, the commodities were less 10 years later. Although Ehrlich had said, because of the population increasing, people were going to be killing each other for the various, goods, resources. So I'm only saying that because I know you have to go, but to simply say to you, we hope to live up to the desire and the need to provoke people to just think. And whether or not everybody agrees, that's another thing. So I just wanted to say that because I know you, as I say, you have to get going. It's very, see, the process that we're going to reintroduce into the universities, despite the fact that people don't like it, is thinking. Go ahead.
The only editorial I'll have to that is that I just recently started attending NYU.
Can you just go a bit back up, just because we're trying to just make sure everybody can, because it's video, it's.
I got you. Yeah. So the only edit I have to that is since I started attending NYU this past summer, I thought it was going to be like this ultra-liberal hellhole. I found out that a lot of the professors agree with you guys. Yeah, maybe because some of them are younger, but I've discovered that, yeah, like no one is really trying to force any ideology on me. They're pretty neutral. And I don't know if it's true that they're not teaching LaRouche. I haven't gotten that far. I'm an economics major. But I'm going to definitely pose to my history of economic thought professor what he thinks on this gentleman.
Great.
So, and we'll find out. I'll report back to you, you know.
Yeah, right. Okay, great.
Yeah, keep up the good work, guys.
All right, great. Very good. So is there any other questions? Hold on.
Come back.
I will.
I hope Holly is.
Any other questions? Maybe not. Well, no, if you actually have one, though, but you know, the man put his hand up back there. Let him come up first, Howard, then you. Can you?
Can you come to the microphone?
Thanks.
How you doing? I'd like to know what is the best and quickest way that we can get rid of the United Nations in America right now, because all their policies and everything that they're trying to do are not doing anything for anyone for all these years, just causing all kinds of trouble all over the place, that we can just get them out. What's the quickest way we can do this?
Well,
Because protesting outside and doing anything like that, let them go broke, okay? Let's see what happens. I mean, we got to figure this out. They're definitely not in the interest of the humankind, that's for sure.
well, I'll say what I said, and maybe Diana has something additional.
Yeah, I missed it.
When Donald Trump gave his speech at the UN, he had a phrase which upset people at the New York Times and other places because they reported it as such, and they said he gave this speech and he wasn't in any way trying to harmonize with the internationalism that we usually hear at the UN. And he said, the future does not belong to the globalists. The future belongs to the patriots. Okay. He wasn't referring to the football team.
Absolutely not.
Okay? He was making a point which we're making here. And it's one of these things that people just don't get. Like, for example, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, okay, goes to Houston. He does a rally with Donald Trump. And as close as you can come to saying, vote for the president, he came as close as anybody could possibly come. Now, that's 1.2 billion people in that country. And they don't agree on all kinds of things. And many different variations in the culture, right?
Yeah, all the different tribes type people.
Yeah, all sorts of things, right? And so, and of course, this is also a country that just went into space. It went to the South Pole, a very daring mission. I mean, people hadn't been there. And everything worked up to the last part of it, right? They have engineering problems.
They tried. That's what made it different.
Yeah, and check this out. The head of the program, right, the Indian Space Research Organization, was the first person to graduate college in his family. His father is a farmer. And so when then the whole thing didn't come together, he was obviously upset. This is maybe 2 a.m. in the morning or so when this all kind of came together. Prime Minister Modi was in the control center, gave a speech then, and then he came back the next morning and gave another speech. And at the conclusion of that, when the head of the program was walking Modi out, he broke down, started crying. And Modi then caressed him in his arms. This picture went all over the world. Now, compare that to what you heard President Trump say about the troops. See, it's an interesting thing, right? Because the question is, what is it that is happening between these leaders, or between Trump and Xi Jinping, or Trump and Putin? people try to say, oh, well, these guys are like so clever, Trump's not in their class. That's not what's happening. What people are doing, these are people that hold the destiny, actually, of the world in their hands, or like of their...
Humankind, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, a billion people is a lot of people. There were only 2 billion people on the earth in 1950. Okay, so there's almost as many people in Modi's country or in China as there used to be on earth, okay?
Yeah, in the whole world.
Yeah, so these people are not meeting or discussing things lightly. So now we come to the United Nations. So what I think is that what will happen as a result of what President Trump is asserting, assuming that we activate the American people properly, because this is the real issue. If you watch what's going on, is that he is taking the temperature of the American people and he's responding wherever he can, and he's deploying however he can, completely independent of party affiliations. Like this thing he said, it's in the tweets, where he asked the question 2 days ago, hey, I can understand why there's some people in the Republican Party that want me to keep going to war, but where's the anti-war movement? Where's the left? I'm saying this thing, I'm going after the military-industrial complex. They're silent. Silence is not always golden. I know what he's doing. What he's doing is, his notion is, I'm the president of all the people. I'm not going to do this on the basis of party. I want everybody to be with me that's with me. I don't care what their affiliation is or if they have any affiliation. So I find that this is the concept that is at work. Now, how does that affect the United Nations? Roosevelt had a concept when he proposed it. First of all, the United Nations wasn't going to be in New York, it was going to be on the West Coast. But he was thinking, first he thought he was going to live, FDR, right? So when he talked about, when he talked about the United Nations, he was doing something very specific. And it's the same thing he thought when he was talking about the World Bank. Because what his concept was not worldism. He was looking at the United States. When he said United Nations, he was looking at it like the United States. He was going to try to do what Lincoln did after the Civil War. He knew the power of the United States, right? It was the only functioning economy in the world, basically. I mean, on an advanced industrial level. And he wanted to create this situation where he could finance these changes. But he was going to be the person that talked to Joe Stalin, not Churchill, because he knew Churchill wasn't going to be there, okay? Yeah, and he couldn't trust him, okay? And he wanted the Chinese in the Security Council. He put them in. They were, they were on their back. They weren't even the Russians or anything. So therefore, in the original design, I'm not even so sure he thought it should absolutely even be permanent. But he certainly had this conception of a world that he was going to put into, actually the bank was originally called the Bank for International Reconstruction and Development. What he was looking at was he was going to try to do what Lincoln was going to do with Reconstruction. That was his idea. So it was a much different thing than what happened. So I'll just say that much about it. I don't think, it's sort of for me, it's like talking about the Federal Reserve, same question. People say, well, let's abolish it. Yeah, but there are ways to do that. For example, if you do an implementation of Glass-Steagall where you're prohibiting speculation and you're only giving money for productive activity, and you make sure that the credit is circulated in such a way that it's taken out of circulation once you've completed whatever the capital budget task is, right?
The way they used to do it.
The way they used to do it, the capital budgets, right. You turn over the money. You can even burn it in some cases, which is really the way you do it, so that you make sure it's not out there. So what I'm trying to say is that I see a transition process where, if you think about it, if you have Russia, China, India, and the United States, I mean, everybody else is joining into that, so to speak.
That's what we're hoping. That's what we're hoping.
And that's the idea.
Out on the street, when I talk to people from India, from Russia, from everything, and work with these people in my life on construction sites and things, they came to this country, whatever. They have no there's nothing against American.
Right.
It's all like a political thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone we've talked to, even when we protested out at the UN with the Sudanese were protesting their leader out there, the Gobai or Gobi or whatever his name was. I told them, if you want us to be able to help you, join with us here in America. Help us with what we can do, and then once we can normalize something here, then we can go help you do what you want to do back in your own country. Because she says, I have a degree and everything, and I want to go back and help my country. We want to help you too. We want to help everybody. Because there was a LaRouche thing that's sitting there about, I think it's Lake Chad or something.
Yeah, right.
Project will bring.
Right.
He said the people are the people are just drought and all this. I says, why do you think people won't want to go in there and invest any money and do anything? Because the UN is probably stopping them. Who knows? You know, they could do anything possible. If they built that dam in China, they could build anything. Anything possible.
This is good. If we build up we call them committees of correspondence because that's what it was called during the American Revolution. Build them in New York. Why? Because everybody's here. Whether you're ready, you pick any place you want, right? And that's exactly the idea. Because anything we build here is going to automatically be international. So if that is backing what the president is saying he wants to do,
a whole separate.
But yeah, that's what that's the idea. Yes, but I'm saying you can actually create. If you look at what Modi did, clearly there are ways, there are avenues, even for a head of state, to figure out how to advance the cause of the American presidency.
And I think Putin would want to say that too, but he thinks it would cause too much of a controversy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
So it's up
actually get on board with that.
Right. It's actually up.
Okay, you know?
It's up to us to find the relevant correlates here in the United States and do it, and we can do it. Okay. So
it's possible. I mean, just working on it and looking at someone to lead to the solution.
That's right.
There's too many people that are against the president and his policies, no matter what it is, no matter how good it's going to be for humankind.
You supersede globalism with the idea of patriotism. You can be a patriot of a country, and you can also be a citizen that helps other people in other countries. No problem.
We're all for that.
Right.
That's what we're trying to lead to and try to figure out, to have somebody lead that effort.
Yes.
And hopefully LaRouche can.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you asked that. I wanted to say something which Dennis alluded to, but has not really been taken up on this. Well, it's interesting because a lot of what you went through on the UN was what I was thinking about. How is it that Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England, comes to the UN General Assembly and says, I have a group of 130 banks with $120 trillion who are going to impose genocide on the planet through our green investments. And what is very important to remember, and it's very challenging because it is a war. When I reflect upon when I first heard Mr. LaRouche speak, it was before he went to prison. It was at a conference called Development is the Name for Peace. And my background as a Quaker, I thought that I should be active doing something, that the world wasn't perfect, but I actually was very naive. I grew up in a little town in Maine. Speaking of environmental brainwashing, we were told in my town that there were people in New York who had never seen a tree. I was like a rabid environmentalist by the time I was 10 years old, I'm sorry to say. And then when I got to New York, boy, was I mad. I would be lied to. But anyway, but I was very upset about poverty. And I thought that people in Africa or South America, that they just somehow couldn't manage. They had terrible weather and it wiped out their crops, and this was why they were poor. And then I heard Mr. LaRouche speak at this conference, and I heard greetings from other leaders in other nations, both Africa and South America, describing the conditions imposed upon them by these banks. That the International Monetary Fund says, well, we'll give you a loan, but you're not allowed to use it for your sewage treatment plant. You can only use it for carts and donkeys. And if you take this loan, we're going to devalue your currency so that by the time you're through, you're going to owe us 300 times what you actually borrowed from us, and then we're going to take over that sewage treatment plant. This had never occurred to me that they would be that evil. And I went from that conference with a headache that just would not leave for days, because it was so disturbing to think of someone with an outlook that actually hated mankind, that actually hated the human race. And I think it's very important to have that in mind when you think about the City of London and Wall Street and what these financial interests are doing, and the fact that they are almost finished, and that they would, if you hate mankind, there is virtually nothing under the sun that you would not be willing to do to save your system, no matter how evil, even to the brink of nuclear war, even to have the delusion that perhaps you could survive a nuclear war, or there could be such a thing as the limited nuclear war. Now, happily, China's Belt and Road Initiative, which the fact that our movement had this fight under Lyndon LaRouche's leadership for so many years in this country, and his Helga Zepp LaRouche's visit to China in 1996, I think we certainly had something to do with the fact that this has been possible. But what China has done is organize 2/3 of the world into a hope for a future without poverty. And the Chinese are very explicit. They said, we are not going to impose our form of government on you. You run your countries how you see fit. We're going to run our country how we see fit. But we think that it's much better for the world if your children can live to be 70, 80, 90, 100 years old, speak 3 languages, be well educated and literate. And in order to do that, you need electricity, you need running water, you need adequate food, you need a culture which encourages that, but many cultures have different ways of achieving that, so you respect that in other countries. That's what's happened. On the other hand, what's happened, particularly since 1971, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold reserve system, is that you've had a cancerous tumor of a bubble in the transatlantic system. That is Western Europe, the US, Britain. London is the center of it. And in 2008, as LaRouche warned, there was a major blowout of the system. And what did they do? They did not say, oh, we were all wrong, we should reorganize it and stop worshiping money and get back to production. They said, no, we're going to circle the wagons, we're going to print more money, we're going to make an even bigger bubble, and we're going to continue the facade that we have a system. And this is probably the biggest vulnerability of President Trump, is to point to the stock market as an indicator of an economic success, because what we've done by printing all this money is you've had this curve of liquidity in the market going up, but if all of that has not gone into physical investment. So if you look at the shape of our roads, the shape of our schools, the lead in the water, the situation with housing, the number of children who are homeless, even here in New York City, what's happened is this bubble has been inflated. It is literally like a 300-pound tick sucking the blood of a chihuahua. And if you have a 10-pound chihuahua and a 300-pound tick, there is an end to that in sight. It cannot go on perpetually, and we are now at that end. So what many people are not aware of, and it's not even being discussed, and the Congress is so busy with this insane, fraudulent impeachment against the president that they're not having emergency measures to talk about the fact that the banks have so lost confidence in each other, and no one knows which banks, or maybe all of them. It's sort of like Halloween with the zombie banks. They do not, every night banks apparently lend each other billions of dollars and they pay it back the next day. And the interest rate on these loans was supposed to stay below 2%. And that's how they played this shell game. Well, all of a sudden, one night in September, they lost confidence and the interest rates went to 10%. Now, you know, if billions and billions of dollars is trading hands. 10% of $1 billion is a good chunk of money. It's not 2%. So suddenly the Federal Reserve has to step in and lend $75 billion to keep people from waking up the next morning and discovering there's no bank. And this has now been happening every night. Thursday night, the Federal Reserve had to step in with $83 billion to stop the entire banking system from being haywire the next morning. And now the New York Federal Reserve has just announced that they are going to be spending $60 billion a month buying US treasuries because the interest rates are so low that no one's going to buy treasuries. So we are in a system which is like this far from completely blowing out. And what they are doing with this Green New Deal is to create a bubble, a new bubble, like what was said about the students being, right? You had the mortgage bubble, then we had the student loan bubble, the credit card debt bubble. Now we're going to have a green bubble and try and somehow hold this thing together. They might like to let it implode right before the November elections. If they don't succeed at getting Trump out, they could crash the system and blame him. That's a possibility. Or they have that little control over it, but that's what they're so desperate about. And that's what's coursing through the United Nations, which makes it so destructive. The intent of it was an institution to make it possible to avoid war. But what's happened is it's completely taken over by the British and completely taken over by this money. And it has become a purveyor of a disgusting, deadly, anti-human culture, which is very destructive. But what you see with these meetings of Trump and Modi, Modi and Xi Jinping are having an extraordinary meeting in India. This is absolutely huge. China and India have had huge problems, bloody border wars, and Modi and Xi Jinping said we're going to have an informal summit. That means no official agreements are going to come out of it. No pressure. They're just getting together and meeting to discuss many, many things. And Putin, Russia, and China have been collaborating very closely. If the United States is able to join this in the way that President Trump is saying, it is emphatically the end of the British Empire. It's the end of that system. And what has to replace it is an economy based on the Moon-Mars mission, based on a fusion, based on the idea that the most important thing is to increase the productivity of each person. So Glass-Steagall now is actually a weapon. And the British had said this some years ago. They said if the US reinstated Glass-Steagall, they would see that as an act of war. Well, why is it an act of war? Because if you separate the banks, then this giant bubble, you're going to just, the air is going to go out of it. It is not going to be there. It is going to implode. And that is the end for them. But then what that allows you to do is use the power of the federal government, as Alexander Hamilton intended, a national bank to direct credit, which we're going to need in large amounts to ensure that the city governments function, that people's pensions are not completely washed away. You're going to have to do a bailout of your population, which frankly will probably be less than the $23 trillion that they spent on bailing out these banks, and who knows what happened with that. That just increased the poverty. And then you're going to have to invest in these things that make you more productive, and you're going to have a mission for a new platform of economy, which is fusion. I mean, these are LaRouche's 4 laws in effect. But this is where we are. So we are at the most unbelievable turning point. And I think that what Trump did, what he's done in the last days, and particularly the speech where he talks about the troops, which we watched at the beginning of this meeting, is kind of a turning point. He clearly is feeling more liberated, in a sense, to do some of the things that are really necessary. Our job as a movement is to ensure that the American people know what's going on. I've been out organizing in the streets the last few days. I didn't meet anyone who knew, I didn't meet one single person who knew that the Federal Reserve is issuing now between 75 and 100 billion a night in short-term loans. And this is a big deal. I mean, maybe for people here that's not much money, but it's a lot of money. So anyway, it's an unbelievable moment that we are in, and we should remember that therefore we have much more power than you would think because they are so weak. But when an evil bastard is weak, they're not going to admit that they're weak. They're going to be more aggressive, more bombastic, more ferocious in your face, and that's where you have to not lose your nerve and fight for what we have to do. So, well, there's a question here, and
Yeah, very quick
go.
question.
What?
How much and what is communicated to Trump from your ideas?
Okay.
How do we answer that?
Well, let me have him take that and I can answer.
Okay. What, do you want to answer this now? Or you want to let him ask his question first?
Yeah, let him ask the question.
Okay, you ask your question first, and then we'll come back to that. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, how are you? Well, my question is on Thursday night, I went to I was in Brooklyn, and I went to see Representative Carolyn Mooney and former Representative Elizabeth Holtman. And Elizabeth Holtman was actually on the committee who impeached Nixon. So I went there to inquire about the real reason for impeaching Trump. And I actually have a question, but this is what they actually said. Number one is treason, and treason is providing aid and comfort to an enemy. So technically, we're not at war with the Ukraine or Russia, so it's technically kind of hard to go for treason. 2, bribery. 3, high crimes and misdemeanors. 4, the twisting of our government as an instrument to cover up wrongdoing. So that's part of the reason why the arrest with what's his name? Mayor Giuliani, and national security, then contempt of court, and his power of pardon and his power of veto were their main concerns for impeaching Trump. And they actually took my question, which I was happy. But so I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Carolyn Mooney and Elizabeth Holtman. And that question is that in the case of a Trump impeachment, how would that affect our overall physical economy and the Artemis space program? And that was the question that I asked.
That's good. Do you want to answer, Dennis? Well, I think that's great. First of all, it's fantastic you went to the meeting, and everyone should go to these meetings because they're trying to figure out if impeachment's going to fly. And we have been surprised that the meetings we've gone to, we've been interviewed by the New York Times and other press, and they cover it. So everyone should go to every meeting that you possibly can and ask the questions. And obviously what they said about the alleged crimes of the president is absurd. One, you said we're not at war with Ukraine. That's true. Second, if you read the full transcript, Trump didn't demand anything of them. So there's not even what they're saying. Biden did do that. Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion and bragged about it on national television. So, I mean, that is a crime. But there was no crime. And see, that's the funny thing. Can you obstruct justice when there was never a crime in the first place? But the point you're asking, which I've seen a number of people who would not consider themselves Trump supporters. A friend of mine on Facebook I was surprised by because I know she can't stand Trump, but she's been getting more and more furious at the Democrats. And she said, what is going on here? They know they don't have the votes in the Senate. Why are they going to tie up the Congress doing this? We have serious problems in the U.S. economy. Who is going to address that? And of course, that's the point. Artemis is not right now fully funded. They're not going to be fighting for that. What I just talked about, the fact that the whole financial system is about to blow out, they're not debating that. So they, frankly, are in contempt of the Constitution. I don't know if there is such a crime, but the U.S. Congress is supposed to be representing us, upholding the principles of the general welfare, and they're not acting to do that. And I think that were they to do this, we could have complete chaos. Who knows? It's very, very destructive and fraudulent. But that is excellent. Please continue to find these meetings and go to them.
Well, it's not a problem. When I asked the question, neither one of the representatives answered my Artemis question. The whole basis of what they answered was about the physical economy. And what
Did they? Well, I have a question for you. Did they know what physical economy is?
The thing about Mrs. Maloney here is that
It's fine.
she is most definitely pushing for overdraft. One of her things about running for representative is she's most definitely for unfair, deceptive, and costly overdraft fees, which hit hardest
Right.
those who can't afford them the,
Right,
them
okay.
the least. Cash
Yeah,
strapped,
right.
Working Americans.
Okay,
college
thanks.
students.
That's yes. So it's all about money.
Yeah.
It's not about the physical economy.
But she never.
Right.
What she really truly said is that if President Trump was impeached, what would help our physical economy is the stopping of the trade wars with China. So basically, her whole concept was if we impeach Trump and get him out of there, the way that it would actually help our physical economy is it would slow down the trading wars with China.
Wow, interesting. Given that he's gotten this agreement, I mean, we're going in the right direction on that now. Moving.
Holtzman, who said that?
Maloney. Maloney. Good. Do you want to address the other question?
I can do it
On the
quick.
on that. Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, let me put it like this. We had 1,000 people who are operating with us here in the New York City area. That'd be a good thing. And we can do that from the standpoint of the committees of correspondence. This does not mean full-time organizers. This just means people who decide that they are going to, in some fashion, become part of our organizing force on a monthly basis. Now, I think that the reason that might actually happen is because there's an election year that will be coming up. We're actually not in the election year. That's been told to people, so now they act as if every year is an election year, right? So this is an election year. But nonetheless, people are prepared to be activated, and that's good. And clearly, you know, next week there's going to be a rally against impeachment in Washington, D.C. So there'll be other activity. In terms of how we get to or get to Trump, it's by doing the right thing. You know, Donald Trump is now saying that the so-called impeachment is simply a coup. First, he said it was a witch hunt. He said it for a long time, but he's used the formulation coup, and why that became important was the press picked up the importance of that. A sitting president talking about a coup against his government is not something that has been done before. Matter of fact, FDR made sure not to say that about the bankers' plot in 1934. FDR never talked about it, even though Smedley Butler testified in front of the Senate. He documented it. He gave the names. He could tell people about the times of the meetings and so on. But FDR never used that. It wasn't because he was afraid to use it. He had it in the background to be used at any point he wished to against Morgan and also other people in his own party. So I'm just saying the fact that Trump stated it was itself a precedent, but it came from us. We were doing this. We've been talking about this for 2 years. So he responded. That's how he responded. Then when someone intervened or made this point about the babies, Donald Trump tweeted, and Donald Trump Jr. tweeted, and then President Trump tweeted. I guess he noticed it. So there's no problem like that. The problem is us. That in other words, the we has to be bigger. I mean, I'll tell you exactly how he thinks. It's a very simple thing, or not how he thinks, but one of the elements. National Black Leadership Forum, he introduces Candace Jones, or Candace Owens, or whatever her name is, right? Candace Owens. And so what happens is he says, you know, I know what star power is. And I've been looking at this lady for 4 years. And 4 years ago, I said, that's a star. Then he talked about some other guy, but don't remember his name, He said, well, I was looking at this guy, and he was really beating up on somebody that Trump doesn't like. And he said, and I'd look to see what is Twitter. And I say, you see, now I see people often, and I go to their accounts, and they got their 3 followers, and I say, well, we got to wait on him or her. Okay? But this guy is 700,000. See, now, I'm not telling you we are going to go that route necessarily, but I am saying the following. He is very clear. See, one of the reasons that some of us are not that particularly that energetic about talking about a committee to defend the president, it's not clear to me he needs to be defended. I mean, he seems to be doing a pretty good job of that himself. What needs to happen, right, is that the citizenry needs to get out there and push on the economy in a very straightforward way. So what happens, for example, people should get some suits, some Halloween suits, and go out as zombie banks. Just dress up, get a J.P. Morgan or something, or a Deutsche Bank, whatever you think, right? Get the zombie face and go out as a zombie bank. Just go down to the parade and, you know, there's going to be 1 million people, you know, in the Halloween parade, the soft parade down in the village. Just get in there as a zombie bank. I think that would be noticed. I mean, and these are the sorts of things we can do. I think you can get noticed by Trump. Okay?
Yeah. So I came for CUSA and got another type of education. I think what took place earlier was very useful. I'm running into otherwise decent people with the same types of beliefs and passionate reactions. Also, the Trump deranged syndrome is real, and you have to deal with that. So I'd like to thank you for 3 different demonstrations. You have 3 different people responding in each in your own way. We did not, you know, at first I thought, oh, is the room going to break up in laughter? We're going to start hearing catcalls? No, because it was serious, and it was treated seriously. And Daniel's not here now because the conversation is continuing. What will come of this, I don't know. But it was very helpful for me because we all have passions. We can all lose it and take a low road. But again, each in your own way. I thought this was very important. Now, I've had the pleasure of doing without the level of beauty that this one person did last week on AOC. I've had the pleasure of doing that, and that's a different type of intervention that calls for that type of treatment of those individuals. But we have real people here with real fears. And so particularly in Daniel, all 3 were very useful, but he demonstrated the type of leadership that's required so that he'd make a great senator. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
So I think we've gone far enough today. I still want to get an answer to that question. How can you have 100 billion people and it's less crowded? People are going to have to tune in, maybe next week. So on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to bring everything. Yeah, I did answer your question. We don't have to get to Trump. He will get to us.
Now, would you, as a second part of my question, would you send the contents or the recording of this meeting to Ms. Pelosi?
We don't have to send this. We never have to send this to any intelligence agency in the world. Okay? As Lyndon LaRouche used to say, if you want to get a message to the CIA, pick up the phone. Okay, so we're going to now conclude. So on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I'd like to thank everybody for being here, and we'll see you again next week.